Good afternoon, everybody. We are still waiting for the full panel to join us, but I think with 11 speakers foreseen and 45 minutes for the first round of questions and answers, you can do the math yourself. It is a great pleasure to welcome you here. I've never been to this Bled conference, but I've been told that this the panel with all the foreign ministers is always the highlight, or one of the highlights of this event, where we will have a firework of ideas, both from foreign ministers and from experts and senior officials from other institutions. A firework of concrete ideas which are gripping, memorable, and presented necessarily in a short way. 4 minutes, that's 240 seconds per person. But it doesn't matter, because what really matters isn't really what we say today here on the panel. It's whether you, the audience, or we, the listeners, remember anything that is being said here 2 days from now. That's always the test for a good conference. So if we remember 11 concrete ideas, one from each of our speakers, 2 days from now, 1 week from now, 1 month from now, I think we'll be doing very well. The challenge is to discuss enlargement, and I will have 2 very short questions for our panel that, as envisaged by the organizers, are to ask whether enlargement is still transformative. We have this vision that EU accession changes countries for the better. And we all believe in this, I think, on this panel. But there are lots of radical skeptics who doubt this. They point to Turkey, which has been negotiating for a very long time, and say, well, can we be sure this process transforms countries for the better? So my first question would be, what is the evidence from practitioners that yes, this process is worth keeping because it works, it can transform countries? And secondly, what would need to happen to make it more transformative, to accelerate the reforms in the region? We've had the High Representative Mogherini say that she wants to see irreversible progress throughout the region within the next 2 years. What does that mean? What concretely should happen to make this process irreversible? And with this, I stop and I invite our 6 foreign ministers, 1 deputy foreign minister, and 4 senior officials from the State Department, the Commission, the External Action Service, and the EBRD to share their one idea they want you to walk away from that will transform the Western Balkans in the 2 years to come. So let me start with the Foreign Minister of Albania, Ditmir Bushati.
Thank you, Gerald. I have to warn you that I'm a lawyer and I'm not good at math. I'm not good at math. You posed 2 questions and I'll try to be as brief as possible. First, whether the EU has a transformative effect in our region and in my country, and I believe it has. And if we see nowadays this region, which is in a more peaceful atmosphere than it used to be 5, 10, or 15 years ago, it is because of EU perspective, and it is because of the good cooperation between United States of America and European Union and the labor division that both strategic partners of this region had played in the past. So it goes without saying that all countries have made their efforts in the EU accession process. But on the other hand, the accession process seems not anymore to be the most popular game in town. I tried to explain my concept also in other forums that you don't win or lose any more elections, even in our societies, on European ticket, but the governance is very much dependent on the speed and quality of the EU accession process. And here I would like to take the example of my country, where we have undertaken a massive justice reform, which is very much connected also with the fight against corruption and organized crime, and all this has been conducted under the umbrella of EU accession process. It would have been impossible for us to do it alone. It would have been impossible for us, although we know that there are certain benefits, domestic benefits, even if this process is taking place in vain. But I'm worried about the unpredictability of this process, and I would like first to see this process becoming more predictable. Once you spoke about, in your papers with ESI, about gate crashing principle. We spoke together about the fabula of a student that is having an exam, and if you have a date, then you are well prepared. I remember myself, I was a civil servant when we signed the Stabilization Association Agreement in 2006, so it was 3 years after Thessaloniki, and we were eternal hopefuls at that time. And I was asked by a journalist when Albania will join European Union, and I said if everything is going fine, and if EU is going to be in the same shape, we might join in 10 years' time. And now we are 11 years later, and we are in the process of struggling with the decision for opening accession negotiations. And if someone will ask me when are we joining European Union, I'm afraid that I might have the same answer. And the final point I want to make is on how to work together in order to bridge the existing gap between the average of European Union and Western Balkans. And the bridge is not, the gap is not being bridged, although we are all active players in the Berlin process and in all regional forums. If one sees the economic figures, I'm afraid our American friends are having a sober assessment than we do, and they're saying that we might need up to 30 years to reach the same level. So we need to think in a more strategic manner when we discuss the future of this continent. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dietmir Bushati, for both setting out the issues of how to motivate civil servants and politicians and how to promote convergence of the region. Both questions that are also highly relevant to Bosnia. So what is your evidence that the EU process is transforming Bosnia, and what would need to be done in the next 2 years to make it more transformative?
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for being late on behalf of my colleague Nicola and myself. Lasted a little bit longer than we planned, our bilateral, and thank you for this. I'll try to be as brief since we have a lot of speakers. The most important things about the issues you put out. First of all, I think for Bosnia and Herzegovina, transformative is understating the situation with us, because there is a huge expectations out of European perspective and future for Bosnia and Herzegovina. We had a decrease in popularity of process and of support of us going there as fast as possible. And after this decrease, we are now at 77. So expectations are huge. I was not thinking about talking on EU's side today after a very bad Western Balkan summit for us in Trieste, where we were the only country not signing for the transportation treaty. And today, actually, at the Council of Ministers of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we passed finally this decision. So from today, we are also inside. And now I'm a little bit more, I have a little bit more courage now to speak on this. So yes, I also think we need very precise, very concrete messages from our European partners. I think we need more predictability in the process itself. And of course, when we speak about this, this should never be for the sake of avoiding our duties, our obligations, and what needs to be done within the country. I think the effect that we have out of this European integration process should be at least directed to the institutions. And the problem is that we lack people. I'll speak now on behalf of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I know it's pretty much the same in many countries in the region, but people lack trust in institutions. And this is probably the key reason and the key part of the background why young people, even people with good jobs, with their own apartments, are leaving the region, leaving Bosnia and Herzegovina today. And I think in this communication also that much more attention should be paid to this, how to help us build strong, independent institutions. It is something that will most efficiently bring back, this will most quickly bring back trust to institutions and bring some kind of perspective, positive perspective, because now we have a lack of optimism, total lack of optimism among the people, and nobody sees anything good for them and their families. This is something that needs to be changed. On the issue of the speediness of process, this is the question that we are most frequently asked, and that we hate the most, because it's not entirely up to you, and you don't have all the factors, not even a majority of factors that can influence this. But I think that it would be good if we could get some kind of clear positions, at least connected to the work that needs to be done by the applicant countries. So if there is this, then there will be this at that time, and so on. I think this is something that we need, because I want to finish with this. High percentages of the support in our countries should not be taken for granted. If people start to perceive this process as something elusive, something endless, I'm afraid this might change. People will look for alternatives, and this is something that we want to avoid.
Thanks a lot, Minister Čanadak. Now I turn to Ivica Dačić, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Serbia. When you try to meet, or when you meet skeptics in EU foreign ministries, EU parliaments, or in your own public, that ask whether with all the skepticism about enlargement in Europe, it is realistic to expect Serbia to actually be a member, and Serbia really changing fast enough, what do you respond? And what should happen?
Pa pre svega želim da vas sve pozdravim i da iskažem zadovoljstvo zbog određenih promjena od prošle godine. Stolice nisu drvene.
So first of all, I would like to greet you all here and to express my satisfaction at certain changes that I found here today. These chairs are not made of wood anymore.
Ali za doručak su bile samo 3 zemičke i to jedna prazna. Na što mi je Erjevec odgovorio da smo ipak u Sloveniji.
But for breakfast there were only 3 croissants, one of those without any marmalade or anything inside of it. And Mr. Erjavec told me that we are, after all, in Slovenia.
I kakva je to Evropska unija? Čime ćete nas vi privući?
So, what kind of European Union is this? What do you have on your part to actually attract us?
Malo se šalim, naravno, ali ja od kad znam za sebe, političari u mojoj zemlji obećavaju da ćemo sutra postati članovi Europske unije.
Of course, I'm joking a little bit on this occasion, and as long as I'm a politician, the politicians in my country are making promises that we will become an EU member state as early as tomorrow.
Tako da mi već toliko kasnimo da se zaista stvara jedan utisak da mi nikad nećemo ni da uđemo u Europsku uniju.
So we are already so late in this accession process that there is an impression is being made that we will actually never become a member.
I to utiče na pre svega jednu ocenu u Europskoj uniji kao organizaciji koja nema pravedan odnos prema zemljama Zapadnog Balkana.
And this influence is first of all an estimation with the European Union as an organization that does not have a just and fair relationship with the Western Balkan countries.
Jer ne mogu da verujem da su sve zemlje postale članice Europske unije baš zahvaljujući tome što su ispunile sve kriterije.
Because I simply cannot believe and accept that all EU member states have become the same just by actually fulfilling all the criteria there.
I mogu da se opkladim sa bilo kojim iz Europske unije da kad bi sad ponovo postajale članicama Europske unije, da barem trećina tih zemalja ne bi prošla ti kriterijuma.
And I can bet now with some EU member states that if now they were going through this accession process, I think the third of the countries wouldn't actually fulfill the criteria and enter there.
Znači, Evropska unija je počela kao ekonomski projekat.
So EU started as it was designed and perceived as an economic project,
Ali ima i svoje političke ciljeve.
having also at the same time its political goals.
I da budem iskren, situacija u kojoj se danas nalazi Evropska unija mnogo je nepovoljnija nego pre nekoliko godina kada je Juncker davao izjave o tome da neće pre 2020. da razmišlja o proširenju.
And I have to say honestly that today the situation with the European Union is much more unfavorable than it was years ago when Juncker said that he will not think about enlargement till 2020.
U međuvremenu se desio Brexit,
In the meantime, we also had the Brexit.
u međuvremenu se desila i pobjeda novog američkog predsjednika Donalda Trumpa,
And coming to power of the new United States President Donald Trump.
u međuvremenu se desila migrantska kriza, terorizam.
We also had migration crisis, terrorism.
Tako da, mislim da je Evropskoj uniji u ovom trenutku potreban pozitivan poen, da tako kažem.
So I would say that at this very moment the EU needs so to say positive point.
A gdje će ga ostvariti?
And how is it going to get this?
Šta će to pozitivno Evropska unija da uradi u narednom periodu?
What is it-
Gdje može uopšte da ima pozitivan poen?
Positive that the EU could do in the period ahead, how to realize that?
Ja mislim jedino ovdje,
I think only here
u našem regionu.
in our region.
Zato mislim da je najvažnija stvar reći da je i za Evropsku uniju bitno da proces proširenja se proširi. Se nastavi, ili ćemo mi ući u Evropsku uniju, ili ćemo se pridružiti Evropskoj uniji, ili će ona nama.
So therefore, I hold the view that it is it's very significant for the EU also that this enlargement process continues, because either we will join the EU or the EU will join us.
Tako da se nadam da ćemo ući u Evropsku uniju pre nego što se raspadne.
So I hope that we will enter the EU before it falls apart.
Well, thanks a lot for this very concrete advice. The EU needs to hurry up to bring in the Balkans before it falls apart. Let's head to the front runner in this regional race, which is hopefully joining the EU before more members leave, Montenegro. Now Montenegro is been in this process now the longest, if we leave aside Turkey. It's joined NATO. But are you confident, in fact, that with this process. You are actually getting to the point where you see the goal and what would need to change to make the process more credible and transformative, even in the front runner.
First of all, we have no doubt about EU and our drive to the EU. We believe in EU, and we believe that we have to be a member. And it is why we are working hard to become a member, and it is why we are pretty well ahead in this process, and we hope for the best. There is no doubt in the last several years that there have been a lot of debate about the future of the EU for many reasons, for the migration crisis, for the terrorist threat, for the Brexit, for the rise of the right-wing populism in some key European countries. But I want to believe that election results in Netherlands, France, and I expect in Germany gave back hope in the EU capacities, EU unity, and the European idea. So, having in mind this debate, I want to remind all of you here that when last time met in Slovenia in Brdo Brijuni process together with Slovenia and Croatia, our 6 countries sent a joint letter to Mrs. Mogherini, High Representative Mogherini and Commissioner Hahn, saying that the debate of the future of the EU is actually a debate about our common future. We firmly believe that EU needs us as well as we need EU, because this region, our region, has always needed some additional sources of stability for our economic and our democratic development, and EU is in a current world is that source. Of course, we need strong presence of the United States too, because there are a lot of countries in the region that are seeking NATO membership, and without the so crucial role of the United States, it's very difficult to achieve it. And not only that, it is also United States also European power, and has always been after World War II. We as a country are very keen to cooperate regionally, and it is why we, in a goodwill, joined to the Berlin process. The Trieste summit was a kind of a peak of that process in July last year, and as a country that has extremely good, very good relations with all our neighbors, we are very keen to make the economic cooperation even more vibrant, even better. It is why we were contemplating even idea of the economic union. We also duly joined to the transport community. What we only don't want to see out of this process is to create some Western Balkan cooperation initiative or space and let us wait and say, okay, you Western Balkan 6 countries have your cooperation initiative, cooperation union. You still need to develop it, and when the time comes, you are going to become a member of the family. We want regatta principle to be firmly in place. We want every country to be evaluated by its merits, and we believe that success of each of our countries will be success of the region. It is why we believe that if Montenegro's success to join first, let's say, it will be strong encouragement for the region as a whole. We should also never forget that it is not only a technical process. It is not only about opening and closing chapters. In the Western Balkans, we are witnessing pretty tough geopolitical battle in this world, especially in the last several years. Montenegro was a target of that geopolitical battle in order to be stopped to join NATO recently. So we have to fight piece by piece, country by country, in our EU drive and our NATO drive. It is why EU should demonstrate to all of us that enlargement is a serious process, not only words. We have no reasons to doubt. We have no reasons to too afraid, having in mind many communications, many good messages, many good words. But we have to do much more in a concrete steps from both of us. We have to deliver. We have to make our integration process more serious, more speedy. But also EU have to show that it is fully committed to the enlargement, and that it views enlargement as the best response to the debate on the future of EU. EU will never be free, whole, and at peace without absorbing Western Balkans. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, and congratulations for, of course, being the youngest member of NATO, which is an aspiration that I know the next foreign minister has also set in his sight, Nikola Dimitrov from Macedonia. Where do you see Macedonia in 2 years? Does the EU transform Macedonia, which has been the longest candidate of the ones that we have here on this panel today? What should happen to do so more effectively?
Thank you, Gerald. Allow me first to congratulate the organizers, because this is my last engagement with the forum. I think every year it's getting really better and it's visible. To congratulate whoever thought of the title of this panel, EU Enlargement is Pretending the Name of the Game, and for inviting Gerald to be our moderator. I'll be brief and punchy, I'll try to, given the number of the panelists. First, I don't think there is a better example to the Republic of Macedonia as to how not to do enlargement. Because the transformative effect was actually turned upside down. And in many ways, it's probably on a micro level and a lesson as to what we should not do with the Western Balkans, because we signed the Association and the Stabilization Agreement in 2001, candidate country 2005, for 12 years, as successive positive recommendations of the Commission were ignored over a political issue involving a member state. So essentially, this is what could happen to a country when there is no perspective. And what happened is, in the words of the European Commission, a country with dysfunctional institutions due to state capture. I'm quoting from the last enlargement strategy paper. And to add to this, to try to illustrate the point, this state capture culminated on 27th of April this year, when police officers sided with party orders and against the constitution, when they allowed an angry mob to enter parliament and to bloody faces of politicians. And the doors of the parliament were opened on the inside by some of the members of the then ruling VMRO-DPMNE party. So I think in a negative way, Macedonia is a crystal clear example of what happens when there is no perspective, one. And two, what happens when the reports, the progress reports are softened up, when there is not enough honesty in evaluating progress or decline, and what happens when a country stops taking reform seriously. Macedonia was usually on the right side of things in the region, not part of the wars, managed to calm the situation down in 2001, but in a matter of 2, 3, 4 years, we managed to create a big mess. So I think the response, what could be done better to increase the transformative effect of the process, is take reform seriously, the candidate countries, those also in accession talks, those that have started, but also for the member states, take European perspective seriously. And as opposed to keeping up pretenses or a double bluff of the enlargement. And I would like to also illustrate my point on honesty. In a situation where the EU has low leverage in Macedonia due to the name issue, One of the best reports ever done on Macedonia was done by a commission, by a group of rule of law experts commissioned by the European Commission, headed by Pribe, so-called Pribe report, that in very bold, let's say, easy to read and to understand words, explained what really is wrong with the country. And that had an effect, even without the leverage of the accession, when you call a spade a spade. So I think for us to step up our game as a region, because Europe is not very certain, the world is going through uncertainties, I think we have to take this seriously and to take reform seriously. And I think if we do that, it's going to be easier for the member states to say, this is actually working. And it's the second part is, and I will borrow here, I think, from Gerald's brain, to try to make this as easy to understand as possible for the public, for the civil servants, for the politicians, and to try to make it a measurable race, but not on opening and closing chapters, but on how independent our courts are, how efficient are in fighting corruption, how free are the media in our countries. This should be the core, and not the formalities of the game. And lastly, and I'll stop here, maybe adding a point that the lesson from Macedonia and our new resolve to now make it is also an opportunity for the Commission to show that the process can create results. The other one is the situation of the media in Macedonia. We have not amended laws. We have simply shown political will not to control media by stopping commercials paid by the government that went up to 60% of the media market, and by accepting invitations to go to interviews with political opponents and with unfriendly journalists. And it's a whole lot different story without amending one single legal provision. So political will really matters. I'll stop here.
Thanks a lot. And now the last but not least of our 6 countries in the Western Balkans, Varlaam Murtisai, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kosovo. What does your government, or what do Kosovars expect the EU process to do, and what do you think is realistic in the next 2 years? What would need to happen for this process to work also for Kosovo?
Thank you, Mr. Knaus, very much. I'm very pleased to be and honored to be at this panel and speaking in front of this great audience. You asked 2 questions at the beginning, and from Kosovo perspective, you made completely valid questions. These are the questions that make us every day, not only government officials, but individuals and citizens in Kosovo, make us think and work. And I will try to provide some of the perspectives that maybe could be of help in order to be as close as possible to answering your first question. The process, we do believe that it is transformative. Of course, it's not easy, it's challenging. It looks that it is long, sometimes quite long, and we will talk about how to accelerate that in the second question, and it is very complex sometimes. But finally, I can say that it is doable, and this is important. This is a motivation for all of us, for the government officials, governments in all of our countries. Because why is this process doable? Because we share the values with European Union and with European family, and these values are stronger driving forces than the barriers and obstacles that may rise during the process. It requires a lot of vision and leadership, and I have to mention here maybe 2 key dimensions of leadership here. It's motivation, which can be, let's say, born and raised if you see some light and some destiny at the end of your dream, so to join EU in this case, and trust building, establishment of trust, cultivating and developing that trust, and maintaining. All these dimensions, in particular trust building, I'm thinking here in all directions. It's not only EU or a candidate state or country, but it is within the region and within internal development of individual country. And of course, beyond that, each and every one of us aiming to join EU and to accept new countries in the EU have to develop mindfulness and awareness raising, which is an unending process, I think. Of course, our colleagues here mentioned very important aspects in which all of our countries need to develop further. In the first hand, rule of law, then culture of responsibility, because we are all here politicians, but from different perspective, we are rightly evaluated that we are not responsible politicians and governments very often. Second question of yours, how to accelerate? This is a very important question, I guess, because the process is lasting long, and sometimes when we think and we compare the developments in the region and generally in Europe, and having in mind all the challenges globally, worldwide, this process is taking much longer than the people and the citizens of our countries do deserve. So what can be done in this aspect? Decision making to be accelerated, both in EU and internally in our individual states and countries. What does that mean? It means we have to identify first problems clearly, to prioritize them, and then to address them accordingly, and to stick to that. Not to jump from one issue to another issue, and then to lose the focus. The second thing is internal country development and reforms, in the first hand, rule of law and other aspects, and establishing and building regional cooperation, and this is moving ahead, again slowly, but we are in the right direction, I think, and there are many initiatives on that. So a concrete example I would like to bring here, how the process can be accelerated. For example, Kosovo is ready to chair SCCP. Why should we wait longer than today, for example? These kind of examples, we can find others as well. So we have to take decisions to agree and then move ahead. Because the challenges we face in our Europe and globally are huge and difficult, and we cannot, no one can manage individually. Of course, last but not least, this has to go together hand by hand with United States, and we are very happy to have here Hoyt to share some other thoughts from his perspective as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. So we've had the 6 regional voices. I don't know if Her Excellency Maria Pejcinovic-Buric sees herself as part of the region. Certainly Croatia is an inspiration for others because it is the one country that has managed to join both the EU and NATO first. And I wonder, as an insider on the EU side, when you look at the region, what do you think the EU needs to do that it isn't doing yet? We've heard a lot from our regional colleagues. It needs to be precise, it needs to be concrete, it should be critical, it should be honest. Is it enough, and how to change it?
Can I say a word on the transformative power of EU enlargement? I would just say, if it is not transformative, then something is wrong. And something is wrong can be on either side. Can be on the side of the candidate, meaning that not enough is done and can be on the side of the EU because it hasn't been set up the system of monitoring, benchmarking, or else call it whatever way. The enlargements in the past, some of the enlargements in the past probably didn't need to be transformative because they happened to the countries that were already fully politically and economically democracies and market economies. For transition countries, I think this is, the one thing that shows is it that you are doing something well or not. And transformative and transformation you can see only if in the second part of the process, I would say. You can see small steps in the first part, but in the second it really opens up. And what I think is that sometimes, as it is so huge, it goes virtually to every single thing that you need to at least look at, probably not to change, but look at. So it's so wide that it's difficult to have a person or persons in the country to know and to have this global picture. So I think needs to be transformative. Without transformative powers, it's not worthwhile. So to come back to the questions the question you asked me, what EU may do which is not doing yet? I think it goes on the lines of what may be wrong on the side of the EU. Clear targets. The reports that the EU usually gives, it's kind of so politically balanced, the language fair progress, some progress, little progress, many ways to say the same thing, but not saying really what is needed. Sometimes, yes, sometimes these progress reports are really to the point saying you need to change this law and something. So I think some kind of better monitoring and better, I couldn't say benchmarking, but some more clear targets that are monitored properly. I think that would make the process, is it through the reports? Is it through other way of doing it? But that can be one way. I think that you follow it and you make it better and more transformative. You also ask something else, or that answers your question? Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks a lot. I think what is emerging here is actually a relatively clear demand and agenda, because as we all know, the reports which are supposed to do the benchmarking and the monitoring and the saying where countries are on the road to meeting standards will not be published this year, but next year. So there is time. So one of the big debates is to what extent can they be turned into what Nikola Dimitrov described and what you demand now, tools that are understood, that are clear, and that motivate. Now, if it is okay with you, I would like to bring in our other European guest from the great European power across the Atlantic, as somebody has referred to it, the United States, and Deputy Assistant Secretary from the State Department who's been following this region for a very long time. If you look at the region now, you look at the European debates in the EU and also in the region on the future of enlargement and can Europe handle it and does it work? From Washington, what do you see and what advice do you give both leaders in the region and leaders in the EU?
Well, thank you, Dr. Knaus. Also want to join others in thanking the organizers of another wonderful Bled conference. I'm going to try to take up your challenge of being memorable and gripping, to be memorable by disagreeing with everyone, maybe. And that's difficult because actually a lot of what has been said is extremely wise and difficult to disagree with. But I would say, and in keeping with the title of this, this forum, as Nikola mentioned, is pretending the name of the game. I think if we claim that there has been transformation or that the EU is exerting a transformative effect on the Western Balkans, we would be exaggerating. And I think one of the things that we all recognize, I think if we're honest with ourselves, is that the the maxim or the perhaps joke that I think Stefan Len is credited with back in 2004 about how the European Union pretends to offer membership, and the countries of the Western Balkans pretend to perform the reforms necessary to join the Western Balkans, to a certain extent still pertains. It's not to say that the European Union isn't potentially transformative. I believe very strongly in the potential of the European Union to transform the Western Balkans, and I think it's been said before in this panel, I think that the European Union is perhaps the most important single force for prosperity and peace and security in Europe, perhaps in history. So I don't in any way mean to denigrate the European Union when I say that I don't think it has been as transformative or fully transformative the Western Balkans as possible. But there's a simple fact, I think, that's also the reason for the lack of a transformational effect in the Western Balkans, and that is that it's not enough for the European Union or any force to be transformative or potentially transformative. The subject, or the countries which are to be transformed, must be fully willing, not only able, but fully willing to be transformed. And I think there are a number of countries in the Western Balkans that have not made the fundamental strategic decision that they're going to opt for joining the European Union. I'll give you an example. Without naming countries, I asked one senior official in the Western Balkans once, why are you not putting all of your eggs in the EU basket? Why are you not going 100% for meeting the acquis and the criteria that the European Union is before you? Why are you trying to sit on two stools at the same time? And his answer was, he's not trying to sit on, or his country is not trying to sit on two stools at the same time. He's holding on to two branches at the same time. I won't say which is on one branch and which is the other, you can imagine. But his country is not willing to let go of one branch and jump onto the other until he's sure that this other branch is really firm, it's going to hold. So I think there's an effect in both directions. The EU must be, as others have mentioned, fully committed and willing to hold and to embrace those who will be transformed. On the same token, those countries that want to be part of the Union must be willing to go 100%, not 50%. I think there's also, in terms of our perspective on what is necessary, and when we think of transformation, think of countries that have truly been transformed by the European project, or European integration in general, and I would include NATO as part of that process. Think of Germany after the war, or even the countries from Central Europe that were transformed, I think we can say, after the fall of communism. And they largely transformed in order to join NATO, but also the European Union. One thing that is missing, I believe, is, in addition to the political will, it's the willingness of the institution, the European Union or of NATO or whatever the institution is, to accept that, as many have said, that it is in both sides' interest for that integration, that transformation to take place. And not only to recognize that, to be willing to hold accountable both sides. This is one of the phenomena or practices I think that's missing in the transformation process or the EU project, is that it is possible for countries in the Western Balkans or elsewhere to stay outside of the EU, even though it is in the vital interests of the EU to have those countries or that country inside the European Union. So it's a kind of a voluntary process, when in fact it should be a requirement. And if there are countries, as the Foreign Minister of Macedonia mentioned, that are captured states, or there are states that are run by corrupt politicians who are not allowing the transformation to take place, or the reforms necessary for that transformation to take place, those politicians, those governments should be held accountable. In other words, there should be consequences. And I know this sounds very American, and I've been told many times that, well, you know, you Americans are so ready to use the stick. We Europeans are more about the carrot. Well, it's possible to use a carrot-shaped stick. Find a way to combine the two. But it should not be possible for countries whose security depends on the European Union or NATO, and for whom the security of Europe is important. It should not be possible for those countries or leaders who are keeping those countries outside to remain outside. And it was reminded, one of the ministers mentioned about crisis, and to paraphrase Jean Monnet, the father of the European Union, who said that, countries of the Western Balkans only accept change when faced with necessity, and only recognize that necessity when in the midst of a crisis. So I think our challenge together is to recognize the necessity before the next crisis.
So this gets us straight to the European institutions and to the question whether in Brussels there is somewhere a secret stick that looks like a carrot, or a carrot that can be used as a stick. So I would ask Thomas Meyer-Harting from the European External Action Service, long experience in the region as well. If you look at the next 2 years and what would need to happen to achieve what the High Representative talked about yesterday, irreversible progress, what does that mean for concretely for some of the countries, and what would need to happen also from the side of the EU to make it more likely?
Well, thank you very much. I was not planning to engage on the issue of the carrot-shaped stick, and I don't think that that was the message of the High Representative yesterday, if I may say so. She, in fact, gave the answer to the question of the organizers, whether enlargement is only about pretense or about pretending. She was very clear, as we've said all along, that the future of the region lies in the European Union. It's a promise that we made long ago, and it's a promise that we only reiterated a few months ago in the European Council under quite difficult overall circumstances in the European Union. Has this process been sufficiently transformative, as you asked? It's strange. I mean, if we would have asked that question a year ago, I would have found it slightly more appropriate than this year, to be honest. We are here and we're speaking about quite a number, and we're looking at quite a number of remarkable successes over the last months and over the last year. We've seen a new beginning in Skopje, a new beginning linked also to a new regional approach. We've seen a remarkable, if I may say so, justice reform in Albania. We see the willingness in Belgrade and Pristina to engage in a comprehensive dialogue which deals with all outstanding issues. And even in the complex case of Bosnia and Herzegovina is engaging on the difficult process of answering our very comprehensive questionnaire. And obviously all of this could only happen because of the engagement of politicians. But on the other hand, I think it would be naive not to think that this was not also due to the pulling power of the European Union. Nothing of this would have happened without that power of the European Union, that transformative power. In this sense, I think we have shown a transformative capacity in this year, which was even stronger than in past years. We may not be particularly good at selling that transformative capacity. One always hears about these opinion polls in one of the candidates about these opinion polls that the biggest supporter, economic supporter of the country is not us, but somebody else, an eastern neighbor. I mean, obviously, we know what we contribute to the development of the region. We know what we've contributed in the field of free travel, in the field of cooperation with students, etc. So perhaps we should make a stronger collective effort, the European Union and the partners in the region, to sell this transformative achievement. What happens in the next few years? Again, the High Representative has made the task easy for me, because she said that we have to move forward as best we can during this mandate to make the process irreversible. Obviously, this is, as you said, a key year, the next year, the last full year in the mandate of the Commission, the year in which the last sort of full comprehensive report will be published. And although this is boring, of course, progress in relation to all partners is linked to moving forward in the process. And the ambitions and the expectations of our partners are linked to this process. Obviously, Montenegro would like to open all chapters, all remaining chapters. Obviously, Serbia would like to progress more in its negotiations, obviously be faster. Obviously, we would, Skopje and Tirana would like to meet the overall conditions that make it possible to open negotiations. And in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina want to move forward on the opinion process. That's sort of what we would need to see, whether and how this can be achieved in the next years. And if we make progress, then we will have made a very important progress towards the next Commission, which has not limited itself. As yet, we don't not yet know what the ambitions of the next Commission are, but obviously this would provide the possibilities for a new start. I listened, as everybody else, with amusement to what Deputy Prime Minister Dacic said about the perspectives of Serbia and the European Union. I think that everybody who's followed developments in the European Union in recent weeks and months has seen how much the challenge of Brexit has strengthened the internal cohesion of the European Union. And if you ask me, and the High Representative has said it, in fact, in the past, obviously, we will not stay at 27. We will grow beyond 27 thanks to this region. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this, and also for being so precise about what it might mean for the next 2 years for some of the countries. I noticed one country was left out, and I'm sure we can get to that in the discussion.
I can obviously, I mean, in case, if you're referring to our partners in Kosovo, the first challenge that we there have, of course, is to make visa liberalization work and meet the full conditions for visa liberalization.
Okay, excellent. So we have a concrete set of goals for the next 2 years. Let me move metaphorically across the road and just across the seat to the Commission and to Walter Deffer, Special Advisor to the Commissioner. From the side of the Commission, what do you expect? What do you hope will happen? What do you think the countries of the region need to do they don't do? And how happy are you about the member states, which are, from time to time, certainly sending ambiguous signals, even if there is now more clarity that the European Union will still be around in 10 years, also for European publics, than there might have been 1 year ago.
Okay, just to clarify, right, Thomas has said it all in the general terms. I was Director General for Gio Hahn when he was Commissioner for Regional Policy. He has moved on. I'm now retired for regional policy. And this is why I actually want to complement more from a regional policy perspective. And there are just a couple of words, very brief. One should not underestimate the transformative power of the cooperation between Western Balkan regions and the EU that is happening at the moment. So we have 9 programs, €500 million in the current period, where we support Western Balkan regions working together with their EU counterparts on the other side on a daily basis. So this is learning by doing, how to work together, how to implement EU rules and what have you. So these are kind of mini labs of integration. And then there are much higher profile politically, the macro-regional strategies. So we have 4 EU strategies there. 2 are of relevance for the Western Balkans. It's the Danube Strategy and it's the Adriatic Union Strategy. And here again, I think it's for the first time in this kind of setup that for high-profile initiatives endorsed by the European Council, the Western Balkan participating countries, they are there on an equal footing. So they are shaping and deciding on development issues for the Danube and for the Adriatic Union region. Serbia, for instance, is very active now when it comes to the Danube. So these are concrete examples of what can happen in very concrete terms in the area of regional cooperation. You were asking for things to improve. It's nothing new, but I think it cannot be repeated often enough, and this is the build-up of administrative capacity. So all transformative policies regional policy, of course, too. What they need are the administrative resources in terms of quantity and in terms of quality. And there, of course, that's a task for the participating, the Western Balkan countries, but the EU and the Commission has to do and has to help. And I think there we can do more in terms of technical assistance, peer-to-peer learning. That's all I wanted to add to this debate. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And so last but not least, we come to a question, we return to the question that Dietmar Bujati raised at the very beginning when he talked about the promise of convergence. I mean, one way in which we measure transformative power is asking the question whether the Western Balkan countries are catching up with EU average of GDP per capita, with investment, with human capital, with the PISA results. How good are the 14-year-olds when they do math and reading tests at age 14? How good are education systems? How much investment is coming? How much is the Western Balkan using the relative openness now in terms of trade to actually converge with the rest of Europe? And so perhaps as a final panelist, the perspective from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and Pierre Heilbronn, to give us a sense of, from your perspective, the question of transformation and what more needs to happen. How does it present itself?
Thank you very much. And I will be brief because I'm the last panelist speaking in this first round, and I think you are probably nearly exhausted. In fact, 3 or 4 years ago, EBRD published its flagship report, which was called Stuck in Transition, with a question mark. After, by the way, more than 20 years of investment in the Western Balkans, we've invested more than 10 billion euros in this region, which is a huge amount, and we were questioning ourselves the results, the systemic results from hundreds and hundreds of projects we invested in these 6 countries. By the way, at the same time, the Commission produced its new approach, which is fundamentals first, which, by the way, join very much this questioning about the results we have and we've had in the last 20 years. It's always easy to be sarcastic and to look in a way which is critical about what we've done. It's more obviously useful to look at what we can improve. And I think when you talk about real transformation, there are also, obviously it was mentioned, the question of money, the question of political horizon and motivation linked to deadlines. I think what is very important is to take also the issue at its roots, the question of rule of law, anti-corruption, business environment. All of that, I think, has more or less transformed also the approach. Maybe we've not done the full road on that, but the approach from the EU side. But also at EBRD, being a bank and financing project, we've also changed quite a lot our approach, or added also policy engagement, work on investment climate, work on the judiciary, and there are many examples which were mentioned by the countries where we operate, which are very transformative, and not transformative for just the next 2 months or year, but for sustainable reform and growth in these countries. What we can do better, I think 2 things, probably having an approach which is more supportive in concrete terms and not just on paper. I think capacity building is very important. Recommendation and clarity of recommendation is important. Afterwards, accompanying the ministry, the public administration which are involved is also extremely important. And that's also our duty to help all the countries to go down this road. The second aspect, which is especially important for a bank as ourselves, being very focused on the private sector, I think is inclusion of all stakeholders. I didn't hear the role of civil societies. Obviously, institutions are very important, and trust in institutions is very important, but probably it's also good to rely on other actors. And probably when I meet entrepreneurs of this region, you have quite a lot of hope in also the capacity to transform the society, the economies, giving also more trust to them. For example, in Trieste, we have the honor to inaugurate this regional chamber of commerce, and EBRD, as you know, is a strategic partner of this regional chamber of commerce. I think it's very important to rely also on what the businesses think about the impediments to cross-border trade, the impediments to business environment being more thriving. So I would say inclusiveness in the approach we transform countries is, at least from our experience, as important as also the institutional building, which is, as you know, we devote a lot of resources to.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to all the panelists for these concrete ideas and suggestions. And we still have time, because everybody was so precise and concise, for some questions. We think about which questions you would like to ask and to whom. And while you think about it, we will have the official title is keynote listener, but it's really an expert on the region who has had time to think about comments and questions before, Milan Nic. And then we'll have about 15 minutes before we wrap up this panel.
Thank you very much, Gerald. I listened carefully, and congrats also to the audience that really kept listening attentively. I will be very brief. I cannot react to what Minister Dacic said, because he never disappoints, and he comes and entertains. Sometimes he answers questions, and he complains about the chairs here. And I want to comment on that you are here highly represented as ministers of foreign affairs from the region, because there is no comparable forum in the region. You have to come to Bled or to Globsec, my previous organization, Bratislava, because we convene, you come, we can bring high-level audience from the EU. So even if the chairs are not comfortable, Mr. Minister Dacic, I'm sure you will show up again next year. And they are emerging forums, not to diminish, for instance, Belgrade Security Forum, but they don't get enough help from your foreign ministry. So the model here is foreign ministry doing it with civil society. The model in Globsec is foreign ministry with the civil society. And I would like to see more of that in your region. Now, 3 questions. Let me remind us, all of us, that when EU leaders back in March addressed the Western Balkan region and situation in the region after many years on the EU summit, at least one or more countries were at the brink of internal collapse. I'm talking about the key crisis country now, Macedonia, which improved in the meantime. There were some elections in the region on the calendar. We are over that. And I was interested to hear from you what kind of period lies ahead, how do you want to use it, and what is the key now in this maybe half year or a year of more quiet time. Let me continue on that. Minister Darmanovic, you said that the Balkans always needed external sources of stability and security. Some of you also showed preparedness to contribute to that internally, so being security providers. And as EU will be very concentrated on its own reshape after German elections, in which you have a stake in that reshape of the EU. I think this will be increasingly asked from you. How can you contribute to that internally? How can you build internal sources of stability, regional cooperation, security? And in Berlin, where I'm based, at the DGAP now, I keep hearing 2 concerns. One, the example of Macedonia, the case of Gruevski, can be repeated in the region. The autocrats, they are solid. What should be done differently so that we don't have a Gruevski problem again? I will not name countries. My second question will be about concerning Germany, that Berlin is trying to provide leadership on the Western Balkans in the EU, but is feeling increasingly alone. Yeah. So France is key in this. Have you noticed more engagement from France under Macron towards the region? And attached to it, question about US administration. Do you see more disengagement from the US under the Trump administration? And last but not least, the economic growth has picked up in the region finally. Do you see more foreign direct investment coming? Do you see some signs that things are changing, and not only from China, which likes to spend on its own workers and on its own stuff? There, thank you.
Thanks a lot. And before we turn to the panel, let me see if there are... Yes, Tobias. Introduce yourself, and perhaps if you have a specific question to somebody, let us know to whom it is directed.
All right. Thank you very much, Tobias Westenkamp. I had the pleasure to share with Dacic, Minister Dacic and the other colleagues last year. Very quick question to the term irreversibility, to the colleague from the European External Action Service. Now, we have seen that European integration is indeed reversible. We have a member state leaving. So what is our yardstick? What is our benchmark for irreversibility? And one idea I wanted to pick up from Hoyt about the branches. One moment to grow this one branch, the European branch, was the Thessaloniki summit. I took the liberty to propose something in the Strategic Times and say, like, why can't we have a repeat of the Thessaloniki summit, meaning the first EU Western Balkan summits after 15 years next year, to actually show that the second branch, or the first branch rather, the European branch, is very strong and solid. So the question would be, would you welcome an EU Western Balkan summit in 2018?
Very concrete and very precise question. Another question or comment from the audience to any of the ministers? Or any of the other panelists.
Hello, my name is Andras Schiller. I'm current program director of Epsilon Institute, but I'm like working in a youth sector for like about 10 years now. And in the youth sector, I was cooperating quite a lot in the region of Western Balkans. And I saw what I saw as a key for like some improvement there was especially this regional cooperation. I organized a lot of youth projects in the region, and I saw that the projects really improved the mutual understanding of history, of culture, and everything there. So my question to panelists is, where do you see the possibility to even increase this regional cooperation on higher level, especially in terms of these transnational regional programs such as Danube Strategy, Adriatic Strategy, because I think this counts as a nice opportunity also for some funding, which is like the basics for some sort of cooperation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot on how to increase regional cooperation. And one last question from the audience. If not, then let me go, because obviously we can't have all 11 answer these questions in the next 9 minutes, but let me perhaps direct the first question, Milan, the moving away from collapse, and what period are we in now, to the country that had this most recent collapse, or near collapse, and as Thomas Meyer-Harting pointed out, is now a success story of outside intervention, Macedonia. What period is Macedonia or the region in now? Is it the shock after the collapse that will inspire more energy and more focus? Or are we just waiting for another crisis? As we were quoting Jean Monnet, we need crisis to move forward. That's not actually very reassuring.
I disagree with Milan. He said Macedonia was the key crisis country. I think Macedonia has become a key opportunity country. And that is because we have taken the saying, never waste a good crisis, very seriously, talking about taking things seriously. We have learned a lesson. We want a functional parliament that will check on the executive. We want free media that will be reporting free. We want judges that will judge without political interference. We want a chief public prosecutor that will do her or his job. And that is why Macedonia today is an opportunity to show transformation. And to end on a higher, more optimistic note, I think we have, for slightly less than 2 years, institutions in Brussels. that have seen some of these problems. And I think ever since March and Federica's visit in the region, we have some attention. And we have this window that we must use in parallel with 3 presidencies of the Council of the European Union that pay attention to our region and that know that this is important. So I think if we do things right on our side, chances are that there will be political will among the member states as well to actually make a decisive step forward of the region towards Europe. And I think that's really necessary because the alternative to the European agenda of the Western Balkans is back to this old discussion of ethnicity and borders that is not helpful and that leads to destabilization. So let's take this window and make use of it. And my last point, talking about transformation, the real transformative effect of enlargement comes with accession talks, which is essentially a fancy phrase for coaching. It's a coaching exercise. And it is not very wise to keep countries ahead of that before that coaching exercise starts. So I think definitely in areas that are important for Europe and important for the region, I think we should put less of an emphasis of the political decision of the start of the accession talks and more pragmatic on what really we need to achieve in the region. For instance, we can try with border management because we saw with the migrant crisis how integral the region is for the security of Europe. But I think we can go in many areas and make a difference. It's a coaching exercise that has been prevented to some of the countries that are not in the accession process in terms of negotiations. Thank you.
Well, and perhaps if I direct the question of Tobias on the benchmark for irreversibility to the Thomas Mayharding from the External Action Service, internally, how do you discuss, having seen EU member states sort of try to leave, slip back, go back on democratic standards, which is of course heavily discussed in Brussels at the moment, how do you define irreversibility in the Western Balkans?
Others may want to comment. I don't think there's such a thing as a physical law of irreversibility in international relations. It's true that if you go back to the foundation of the European Union, even Jean Monnet said that the purpose of the exercise is not only to make war unthinkable, but materially impossible. Do we know for sure whether war has become materially impossible in Europe? I mean, it's the longest period in European history, I think, for something like 1,600 years of uninterrupted peace amongst the countries that form part of the European Union. And precisely one of the parts of the continent where war erupted in recent decades was this region, which was not yet integrated. Does it mean that the process is absolutely irreversible? Does it mean that the United Kingdom will turn completely away? I sometimes think when it comes to Brexit that the cardinal error of the United Kingdom was to join too late. And had they joined in 1951, when the process started, their whole involvement in the process might perhaps have been different. We don't know. I mean, I think that what the High Representative said is that we want to help the countries of the region to make their path towards the European Union irreversible. This is not a law of physics, but a political goal.
Thanks a lot, and I think this is a good conclusion to this debate, because what it reminds us of is that history has no direction. I have lived 7 years in Turkey. I was in Turkey when the accession talks started in 2005. No country has negotiated longer with the EU than Turkey, and it's pretty obvious that when it comes to the transformative effect on Turkish democracy, well, there is something left to be desired, as well as for the relationship between the EU and Turkey, which in many respects is significantly worse now than it was in 2005. So history has no direction. It will depend on the people here. One last comment from...
Thanks. Just, I don't want to leave the question about U.S. administration commitment unanswered. And just to say that I think if you took a poll of everyone on this panel, including the moderator, 55% of the respondents would say that the US is perhaps a little bit too present in the Western Balkans. 45% would say the US is woefully absent from the Western Balkans. So I think you'll find that there's an even distribution of both unhappiness and happiness about our presence. And our intention is to continue to be as helpful as we can, as present as people, countries represented around here will tolerate. And just lastly, to finalize, just to correct one mention by Minister Bushati, I did not say that the United States believes that the countries of the Western Balkans will not be ready to join the European Union until 30 years from now. I was, in fact, misquoted. What I was doing is quoting, in an interview, a World Bank study, which I think has been quoted by others on this panel, that it will take approximately 30 years for countries of the Western Balkans at even a doubled rate of growth, economic growth, to meet the economic standards. And the point I want to end on is that in some ways it is more important for the countries of the Western Balkans to meet the standards for joining the EU than actually joining the EU. You have control over meeting those reforms. And it was exactly, we seem to be overquoting Jean Monnet, but he said that the purpose of well, he said community at that time. The community is not an end in itself. It's a process of change. And it's that process of change that countries in the Western Balkans should continue to strive for.
Thanks a lot. I think there was a lot of encouragement in the contributions here. Decisive next 2 years coming up. Well, we will hear more suggestions about the Slovenian
imam jednu
food
pretnju
for
za
next
Sjedinjene Američke Države. Ako nas ne primi u Evropsku uniju, mi ćemo tražimo prijem u Sjedinjene Američke Države.
So, if they do not receive us into the European Union, we will ask United States to receive us there.
Bliži smo od Havaja u svakom slučaju.
Membership, we are closer to Hawaii in any case.
Well, I think given some developments in Washington where a lot of things are unpredictable, who knows? I would like to thank all the panelists and the organizers who contributed to this debate, and I would ask you to remain seated for a moment because we will have now Andrei Loga, the State Secretary of our host country, to conclude the conference. But I think the panelists, I don't know what the idea is, whether we should stay sitting here. No, we will not stay sitting here. We will leave and we will listen, but only us, you will stay hopefully, and we will listen to the State Secretary conclude a very interesting event. And thank you, the audience, for your attention. A microphone. Okay. Or you want to sit here?